Welcome to This Commerce Life. We are an unscripted podcast dedicated to small businesses and entrepreneurs in the retail and consumer packaged goods space in Canada and the United States.
I am Phil Chang, co-host and co-founder.
And I'm Kenny Vanucci, co-host and co-founder of This Commerce Life.
Our love is the journey to retail, and our passion is sharing that with you every week.
Must have a genie in a bottle, because you just, if you have 3 wishes, you said, geez, I wonder what Phil is. And then Phil appeared. So I think you've only got 2 wishes left. So
I think
that's okay.
No. Do you know how many of those wishes there are, James? Like, there are a lot of those.
maybe they're unlimited. I don't know. I've never had a genie.
Who knows? Who knows?
We'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
Who knows?
It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, Phil.
I've heard your name, but we've never met. So
I only met him the one time just a couple weeks ago, whatever the hell that was. That was the first time. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Your cohort, I know.
Yes, my partner in crime.
Yes, your partner in crime there, I know.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever her name is, yeah.
Whatever that one's name is. And then the minions below her that I don't like either. I don't like any of that crew. They're all mean to me, make me do shit that I don't like doing.
No, I like Sumner's good. Sumner and I have an agreement.
Sumner's
she needs
awesome.
Kenny to do something. She calls me. And
Exactly.
I have unlimited wishes there. So
yeah. And if Elisa calls, like she asked me to talk to I guess some young person who just signed up with you guys. So I can't say no. So of course I'm going to do it. So whatever.
And she's counting on that.
I did already. I had the phone call today.
Oh, did you? Oh, that's good.
Yeah, really nice young woman. Afghani woman who's trying to do some cool things. Yeah, really sweet. I really liked her.
It's incredible. It was funny, actually. I was interviewed for Western Food Processor magazine, and he, we were talking a little bit about the economy and kind of, because we're hearing a little bit more gloom and doom than we have in quite a while, and they were talking about, geez, are you not seeing any more new companies entering the space? And I'm like, well, no, because the cost of entry to actually getting started in this industry is really low, right? There's not a lot of barriers to entry. If you have a recipe and a place to make your product and come up with a brand name and a label, you can get started, right? So it's like, well, no, we're not seeing it slow down. I said, how long those companies last, or decide that they don't have the stomach for it, that's a completely different topic. But anyway,
and that's happening, right? Because we were talking about this the other day, Phil and I. You got all the government grants and stuff are going to be coming due pretty quick. There's some BDC that are already happening. You signed it when the interest rates were zipped, at COVID. Now they're, getting close to 8-9% on some of these paybacks. Like it's not easy.
No, it's not. And, and that's the problem though, right? With processors, is they kind of get squeezed in the middle, because they got all these costs are coming one way, and then their ability to pass them on. And sometimes it's not even just dealing with retailers on passing on their costs. It's the fact that there's been such a continuous increase. It's even catching up to it. If you look at your prices and think, geez, I got to mark everything up 20%, and it takes you 6 months to get that implemented into your pricing. It's probably gone up another 15 since then, right? Yeah. So it's been like running up a down escalator for the last 2 years for people. So
it's out of control, and there's been it has slowed down. It's been a lot less offensive lately than it's been, but then there's other issues. Like there always seems to be something smacking us right now, right? Since COVID, we haven't had really a break. It's one thing or another. But
and that's the problem, right? Everyone kind of made it through COVID, and I think everyone was expecting rainbows and sunshine, and it's just been kind of now we're paying for all the SIVA loans and a lot of those other things too. So some of the inflationary stuff, I think most of us saw it coming, but it's just the rate at which it's coming, and the fact that it's not leveling off, or it's leveling off a bit now, but it's leveling off at such a high point though. It's
exactly
how sustainable is it, right? Yeah,
exactly. And what's leveling off? Some is leveling off, then others pick up, and then those slow down. The other side picks up. It just seems to go back and forth. And yet, what? People are still battling through. We still talk to people who are doing really cool things, and organizations like yours or CHFA who are helping behind it. Really, at the end of the day, it's at least you have some support out there. We'll talk more about this in a minute, but at least there's places for people to get some help, some guidance, right?
Yeah, and it's just really kind of there's groups like ours who are in CHFA, like you mentioned, if we're doing our job when we're staying on top of it. I mean, what we're supposed to be doing is adapting and changing when when industry's needs change. So
exactly
it's been 5 years of that now. So.
But that's what I think. There's it doesn't seem to be getting a break. Like you're looking for a time where, okay, maybe just for the next little bit, just status quo. We'll just maintain. You don't get the maintain part. It's just always something coming at us, right?
Very true. Very true. So
you'd be bored to tears otherwise.
That's by 1,000 cuts. Yeah, we'll run out of stuff to do otherwise. Yeah,
exactly. Plus, what would we complain about?
Yeah, that's right.
Not going to complain about the weather. We haven't seen rain in months. Like we're actually kind of a little bit dry, but
yeah, no kidding. I know I've been watching the U.S. feed, seeing all the complaining about all the Canadian smoke that's crossing the border. So
shit, and we haven't even started.
I know. Like we're not even in mid-June
not
yet.
Even mid-June yet.
Kind of scary. I know, it's wild. So it's getting
it's
closer
funny.
to home too. I saw some in near Chilliwack. Now there's some fires.
Harrison, they were saying. Yeah, Harrison.
Well, it's Harrison, but this morning was Chilliwack. So
was it Chilliwack? Jeez.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, for us too, like, so for Torontonians, forest fires isn't a thing, right? Like, so I know it because, like, usually every year I'm out to see Kenny, and then in the summer when I come out, there's usually some sort of haze, right? So you get used to it. And we're like, I'm solidly in Toronto, like in Mississauga near the airport, and we've had 3 or 4 days of it now. Like today was the first day that they told kids to, like, they're canceling all the outdoor activities. They're bringing them all inside and leaving them inside. And everyone's like, wow, what's this thing? And I was like, actually, I didn't really think about it, because when I go out west to see you guys, usually in the summer, there's a whole bunch of days where there's some haze in the city somewhere, right? And so you kind of don't, but we've never seen it. Like, I think we've got fires burning outside of Ottawa now. Which is, for us, it's insanity. Pretty surprising. It's surprising, right? So yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, man. Kenny, do you want to do an intro?
I hope we don't run out of things to talk about, guys.
No, not likely. We can all yap quite a bit.
Not likely.
I'm not. Yeah, that's probably the least of the issues.
I don't think that's the concern.
Yeah, and I'm not too worried about that.
It's not. Yeah.
James, you can light it up in a minute, because what we'll do. So we have James Donaldson on today, CEO of BC Food. I didn't know if it's CEO or president. CEO of BC Food and Beverage. So in BC, that's our go-to people. If you're starting up in the food industry on the production, processing, manufacturing side, phenomenal organization, good people at the top, a couple good people in the middle. I'm not going to give Sumner credit yet, because she's getting in trouble.
I love you. Don't worry about
it.
Don't worry about Kenny.
Not going to do it.
Right? I'll look after him for you.
Whatever.
Keep doing what you're doing.
A good group and helpful for people starting up. So James, for you, I think for Phil and I, what we'd like to know is sort of, I guess, where you came from, how you got here, or why you got here. I'd like a little more talk around BC Food and Bev, like what it's about, what's the goals, what are you finding, and then some insights. What do you think? Like, I mean, we talked a little bit about we sort of high level, some of the issues and complaints that just have been 3 years worth of it. But where do you think the industry's going? What do you think the bright spots are going to be? Where do you think some of the challenges are going to be? But 45 minutes an hour is it's yours, man.
All right. Well, sure. I mean, wow, where did it start? Well, I was originally from Winnipeg. I moved here in 91. So when I was 3 years old, obviously.
For sure.
No. I graduated from the University of Manitoba and moved here. It was funny. I kind of moved here on a bit of a whim. My sister moved here and was trying to talk me into it. And I didn't know what to do in Winnipeg. There was not a lot of pure aspirations for me. So I thought I'd come out here and give it a whirl. And actually I had a job with BC Hydro as a financial analyst. Doesn't that sound exciting?
That sounds exciting. Rip roaring.
Yeah. And then I got a letter in the mail, because of course that was the pre-internet days, that they put on a hiring freeze and my job no longer existed. This was like 6 weeks before I graduated from university. And I went, well, now what do I do? And I kind of went, you know what, screw it. I'll just go out there and give it a whirl and see. And like I said, that was what, 32 and a half years ago. So I found something. I hit my groove somewhere.
So what did you do after that? Like, what was
Well, it's funny when you graduate with an arts degree, you're not really qualified to do a lot. Yeah, my first job when I moved here, I was selling fax machines. You remember those?
I remember those. Didn't know, and I didn't use those either.
I'm too young for that. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, whatever.
Oh, damn you, Phil.
Yeah, he's a liar. Don't move on. That's bullshit.
I know.
That's
he knows
bullshit.
what they are. I know. I've got young people in the office, and they like to Google it to see. I know it hurts a little bit, but and I did that on commission actually for about a year and a half, and it was a brutal job. It's kind of funny, you sort of learn there that sometimes the worst jobs you learn the most important lessons, and overcoming objections and active listening and that type of thing. It was those were actually really important skills to learn. So and I did that for about a year and a half, and then actually that's kind of when I started getting involved in the food industry. I joined Diageo, which is like the world's largest beverage alcohol company. And I worked there for 5 years and got a lot of training, and first in sales, and I was kind of doing category management and analysis, that type of thing. And then it was funny, and ever since then I've mostly been in the food industry for the last 30 years, and it was kind of never really by design. It was never, it was sort of nothing specific that I set out to do. I thought I'd move out here and pursue my dreams, although I had no idea what those were. And somewhere I found my passion, which was the food industry. So, and that even after Diageo, I went to Ease Veggie Cuisine and worked there for a couple of years and worked under Ethan Hotman. And then I went to BC Hothouse. I was there for 5 years and became marketing director. And then went on to Maple Leaf and was their marketing director for 4 years. And then I started consulting for a few years. And then about 9 years ago, the board was crazy enough to hire me to take on this job. So that was back in 2014. So they've been with me for a while now. So
it's okay. So you've done a bit of everything. You've done some marketing, some sales, and on a few sides of the desk, so to speak, right? Some processing.
Yeah, and actually, even after Maple Leaf, I left and was kind of cool. I took over as a GM of a startup, and they were in the freeze dry space, and I didn't have a lot of familiarity with freeze dry, but it took me to Asia and learned a lot about doing business there because a lot of the shareholders were based there. And unfortunately, that was in 2008, which is sort of not a good time to be a startup trying to raise capital in 2008, 2009. So unfortunately, that venture only lasted a couple of years. And that's when I kind of slid into consulting, where most of my consulting was actually work.
No, so he told me he had to move from his office. His office was before you got on, he was on, and the internet was choppy as choppy. So he moved to a general space, which apparently doesn't work much better. Well, we got dead air there, Phil. So
we do, but interesting, right? Because he definitely understands the space, right? Like he's
been on all sides of it. Did some marketing for BC Hot. I was like the hot house part I find interesting too. I just like all that food side. But he's done a little bit of everything from packaged goods to, I guess, even more the growing side.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah. That is interesting.
Why would you leave booze though? Like, you think that'd be fun?
No, it's a tough place to be though. Because you
really figure out why you left booze to go into food.
Why did I leave booze to go into food? Yeah, sorry, I lost the connection there for a minute, guys. But
it's okay.
It's all good.
We just talk to ourselves. It's all good. We've done that before.
It's funny. That's one of the things about the food industry in BC is that a couple of the jobs that I left, I loved, but it's because you were working in a regional office and the head office was in Toronto. And when I left Diageo and when I left Maple Leaf, it was because essentially my job was being restructured, and they wanted me to move to Toronto in both cases. And in both cases, no offense, Phil, I made the decision to stay in BC because I'd met my wife and we had kids and had grown roots, and we just decided to kind of stay here, and that was just sort of a decision we made. But it's interesting when you're looking for those.
I've never met a West Coaster who has ever I've never met anyone from Toronto who has moved to Vancouver and said, I must go back. Right? I don't, right? Like even me,
and most Winnipeggers, we keep all the Winnipeggers.
Yeah.
None of them go back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Although it's weird though, Winnipeg's, it's funny, Winnipeg gets a hard knock, but I'll tell you what, the people there are so friendly. When I moved here, I couldn't get over how hard it was to meet people coming when I first came to Vancouver, and like Winnipeg, you go start at a job on Monday, and like they're asking you to out for drinks after work.
Yeah,
Like
you
after
did a
you've been there for a
social
day or two.
on Saturday night or Friday night. You guys did socials. Like you guys are always out and about.
That's
Exactly. Yeah, and it's just not like that here, but that's
No.
okay.
No,
I stuck.
but the city's always been like that. The city's not noted for its ultimate friendliness, right? It's just not a easy city to meet people.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I came to love it, and I've stuck it out. So, yeah, but it's certainly been an interesting time, and it was actually funny when I left. I mentioned that startup that I left. When I left, I was a little surprised, because the investors basically said, "Oh yeah, the money we had, we don't have anymore," and actually, when I was younger, I was a real jock growing up, and my dream job was to be in the sporting goods industry, and for a time, I actually got a job working in the action sports industry, and I thought, oh my god, this is amazing! I'm so excited. And that was when I knew that my heart was in the food industry, because I didn't know that until I left the food industry.
Yeah,
and I couldn't believe it. You don't know any of the customers, you don't know any of the other players, and you just feel like kind of naked. You just don't know anything about. You just don't have a lay of the land, and nothing was instinctive. Yeah, and I was there for a while, but of course everyone was going through financial hardship there, so I worked with them for a while, and it just wasn't working, and that's when I went into consulting. But yeah, it was really funny, and even all those years being in the food industry, I never thought of myself as being like a food industry person until I wasn't, and then I thought, holy crap, that's where I belong. So and I haven't left
industry. It's a good industry. Like CPG in general is pretty good, but when you get into the food side, food's fun. Like it really is. It's good. The people are nice. People talk. They share. I don't know. It's a good vibe.
Yeah, well, and that's a big part of what we've done here too. Like, one of our big sort of things that we try to do is to build community. And it's incredible how many times people will reach out to us or join the association, and or just reach out to, because they don't even know where to go, and maybe joining us is one option, and just trying to kind of carve out their path. And it's amazing how many of them are so inclined to figure out, think that they just have to reinvent the wheel and go through all the same struggles that so many companies before them have done. And like, not a lot of people are reinventing the wheel here, and they're all going to run across the same obstacles. They're all going to have the same challenges of trying to scale up. They're all going to have struggle with access to capital. So It's like, it doesn't matter whether it's seafood or natural health products or craft beer, like their products and characteristics and maybe their manufacturing processes are going to be different, but all those other things that they face, they're all the same. So we've kind of always tried to go like there's 80% the same, and there's 20% that makes you unique. So we've always kind of said to people, you focus on the 20% that makes you unique, and we can help you with the other 80%, because we can't be experts in every single subcategory and everything, right? Because we'd have 100 people and we still wouldn't be able to kind of give people the help that they need. So we try to focus on the stuff that affects everybody.
So you left all that to office things. Like, what was the motivation to go to BC Food and Beverage? Like, because that's different. Now you're in a whole different world, right? You're now, it's a different level of consulting, even I guess to some degree. It's a different world than.
Well, it is, and being a nonprofit, like, that was new to me.
That must be new too.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 20 years in the private sector and always had P&L accountability, and always thinking about those kinds of things. And but I kind of initially, the association was a lot smaller back then, so 9 years ago. I don't remember exactly what our membership was, but we had 1 or 2 employees, and we did a lot of government programs and things like that. So when I joined, though, I saw the opportunity there, because I thought, well, I mean, the types of people that are joining the association and need help are the same type of people that I had as clients. So I kind of almost saw a lot of synergies between what I was doing and doing an association, doing it through the association, but trying to do it on a bigger way. I had no clue about things like advocacy and some of the other things that the association did. And I guess that's probably the first thing that I discovered. I thought, well, all we're doing is offering, administering government programs for people. Well, one, like, how, you don't have to be a member to be leveraging those sort of government programs. So what are we offering to our members?
Right.
If all we're giving is government programs, they could do those without joining. So what are we doing here? So we really kind of started to delve into, okay, well, what do people really need? And, advocacy was a big one. And of course, that's, we grew it significantly, what our advocacy efforts were. And then that went to a whole other level during COVID. I mean, it's hard to believe at the beginning of COVID, did you know that the food industry wasn't even considered an essential service? Like, how crazy is that? like what's more essential than food, right?
What's more essential than eating?
Yeah, it wasn't an essential service, and
I didn't know that. I would just assumed it.
I didn't know that at all. That doesn't make any sense at
well,
all.
we've all learned something today, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess there was no real reason. Why would you have to designate it essential service when there's nothing going on? Maybe, I mean, we know it's essential to live, but I guess you don't have to designate it as anything until fucking the world's shutting down on us.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, you know, when things were just kind of chugging along, there wasn't any reason for it. But I mean, all of a sudden, you know, all the suppliers of PPE sort of said, "Oh, you're not an essential service, and we've been told we can only sell to essential services." So all of a sudden, our phones were ringing off the hook from companies that were that could, you know, that just order PPE on a weekly basis, and all of a sudden they, you know, all their suppliers pulled the emergency brake on, and they couldn't get it, and they're all going to shut down because they couldn't even get masks and gloves and hand sanitizer for their staff. Like, it was nuts. So but when he first went to government, you know, they said, well, you know, what difference is that going to make? And I think, you know, here's a good example of it. And even now, if, you know, now that COVID is fortunately in the rearview mirror, I think we need to really think about the food industry as a priority and essential all the time. Like, for example, like you've probably both heard this all the time. Like, you can't find warehouse space right now in any of the urban areas, particularly the Lower Mainland. Commercial space is really hard to find.
Yeah,
people who are having their leases coming up for renewal, they're finding out their lease rates are doubling from where they were when they signed 3 years ago. Well, but why? Well, I mean, like, Amazon's got how many million, you know, square feet of space that they've been gobbling up throughout the Lower Mainland. Like, at one point, well, how do you prioritize food? Like, you can't take away all the places where they can store it and make it and pack it and distribute it,
and you can't push it
say,
oh, Chilliwack.
Yeah, and then well, why are prices so high? Why I don't understand what's going on. It's like, well, that's not treating it like a priority. So I think we need to almost take a more holistic approach to, like, if you really want to take this thing seriously and really call it an essential service, like, what does that mean, and really map out those things. But I mean, that's a really key one. Like, we're hearing all the time from people that are just panicking because they can't find space. So
we talk about it all the time, because I work for 2 distributors, one in the city and one in Burnaby, down where the new Amazon is. Like, they need 17 warehouses in the city, but down there, and you're thinking, you know, this is great, guys. You don't have any place for food really to be, right? You keep pushing it out of the city because obviously real estate in Vancouver is super expensive. Better to develop it, better to do anything, make it new, so you can charge $40 a foot, triple net, right? I get all that.
Exactly.
But the thing is, you know, we're talking one day, and you look at around the world when things go sideways. You know, if we have an earthquake in the city, if you've got no food distribution in the city and it's on the other side of bridges, which may or may not be there, or whatever it is, or you start pushing people all the way out to Chilliwack, you know what our roads are like getting into the city. It's really difficult to move around to Vancouver. Toronto, you know, at least you don't have the mountains and you don't have the earthquake issue, but this city is not easy to move in. And we learned something brutal in COVID. We need to protect our food source.
Well,
we can't rely on everybody.
Well, no, I mean, and that's the thing, you know, and you know, of course, I've talked about it a lot, but I mean, you know, when you saw empty store shelves, I mean, you know, you'd have to go back to the Great Depression when you saw empty store shelves the way they were, right? But
no pasta, no cereal, no basics, right? I mean, my God.
I think it's just surprising to me. Like, I guess it's a podcast, so nobody can see me with the face I've got, but I just don't. We can't. Like, we're all anxious to outrun the past, but like, the pandemic showed us that we didn't do things right. Like, we kind of need to fix these things, and now we're in the same spot again, right? Like,
well, we seem to. It's just a different set of issues. Like, the pandemic making it an essential service probably makes sense because, again, we know the food's essential. We get all that, but you don't think of it as essential service until, you know, you're closing down. What James is saying is right. Like, I don't know, Toronto, you guys have land, like, you can move out. We're kind of stuck. We got a border, an ocean, and a mountain range. Like, there's only so much space we can kind of move in. And when you start choking the city, like, to you know, if you're looking at literally $40 a foot triple net, which means you could be paying up to $48 a foot. Like, if you need 10,000 square feet of warehouse, it's going to cost you a shit ton of money to rent warehouse. You know, and then you do, like, our city infrastructure, like, we live in a great city, but it's not easy to move. Like, when we lost the Coquihalla during the rain that time, and Abbotsford flood, we had 4 ways into the city and all were blocked. Like, nobody could get in or out of the Lower Mainland. That's 2.5 million people in a 5 million person province. We're literally cut off. That's insanity.
Well, it is. And the thing is, most people really thought about the movement of food, but one of the bigger issues that we're dealing with, you're talking about, we're talking about Chilliwack a minute ago. I mean, that the only flour supplier for all the bakeries in the Lower Mainland is based in Chilliwack. And,
Exactly.
and they were cut off. They couldn't get in, they couldn't get
Right.
out. All of a sudden, everybody was running out of ingredients. And then
Staples, bread, think of it.
Absolutely. So that was a huge threat. And then of course, with the backlog of trucks, all of a sudden the containers were getting backed up at the ports. And what we learned is, because I was spending a lot of time on the phone with, the Ministry of Transportation and the Port Authority. And, same thing, but they don't have a system to delineate what's perishable and what's not perishable in the ports. So, you could have you could have a pallet full of bolts or a pallet full of perishable, some sort of a perishable product that's an ingredient for somebody, and they have no way of knowing.
No, you got the bananas rotting on the port, and the bolts are fine, and they were the first guys out. You think about
they're the first guys out because they have no system for it. So same thing, it goes back to, okay, well, if we're actually going to call this an essential service, like what needs to change?
Right.
And these things we're talking about are really just sort of symptoms of the root cause. It's like, well, we actually need to be sort of prioritizing it, and that means sometimes making some tough decisions about, I don't think it's fair to expect private industry to sacrifice. Like, for example, if Amazon comes on and offers you a couple of dollars more a square foot than some small processor, you can't. But then is there something else we can do? If you're gonna, can you create some sort of tax incentives or some sort of incentivize people to be able to kind of prioritize food? Like, you have to actually step back and look at it in a way. You can't just expect people to make a bunch of sacrifices. I mean, hopefully to a certain degree you can, but there's only so far you can take that. But I think we have to almost look at it at the system level and break it down and look at all the number of different things we can do to treat it differently. So
I think that's sometimes where I like, it's since we've been podcasting, especially, we've been involved much more in your organization and much more in CHFA. So you start to learn what the organizations can do. And the challenge I think we have in a lot of these situations is there's no voice. Like there's like small business is the backbone of the country. Small business does not have a voice. Big corporate does, government does, small business doesn't. Food processors have no voice per se. Thank God they have you guys. But you know what I mean? It's really tough to get onto, let's say, it's not sexy TV. It's not sexy news. It doesn't get the sort of respect or airtime that it probably deserves, and it's trying to change that. Like, we need to get out there and really tell people the problems we're having, and there are fixes, and how do we go about this? And it's not giving $400 to everybody to go buy groceries or some bullshit thing that we just did, right?
Yeah.
It's not about running the printing press and we just willy-nilly throw money around. That's not where nobody's asking for that.
No.
I don't know. I don't know what the solutions are, but it's getting very frustrating because you can still see that it's broken.
But we need, like, it's almost like we need a different way, because maybe part of the issue is we've just been so blessed for so long to have really, really great conditions, right? Like, if you think of across the country pre-pandemic,
yeah, no big deal.
Like 08, 09, yes. But then there's 10 years of just really great growth, right? And so we're just not, like, even now you look at it and you go, look, there's forest fires in BC, there's forest fires in Ontario, Quebec, but based on kind of these definitions, we haven't really cleaned up our act to be able to go, guys, it's an emergency. Here's how we do things different, right? Like, pandemic should have said to us, guys, we've never trained. We're not one of those countries that have had a lot of adversity. So we haven't, I say that with all due respect. I get different regions of the country have had,
for the most part, there's no wars, there's no civil unrest, there's no conflicts.
Right? So, but maybe now what we really need to do is sit down and go, what does this really mean? If it's an essential service, if it's essential, then maybe all of our infrastructure needs to be rethunk, right? In terms of like, hey, you know what? I need to be able to find the food. Like, if I have 100 rail cars, how do I figure out which one has the food on it so I can get the damn food off, right? Like, everything else can stay, right? Like, how do I do that, right? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's a long list of stuff that can be looked at, right? And it's also, the thing is, I mean, it's not unique to the food industry, and it's not unique to BC. Just kind of like some of the labor challenges that we've been facing. But at the same time, what makes the food industry unique is it is that essential service. Like, to me, I think that's that key differentiator where I think it warrants look at, like, kind of peeling that onion and looking at all those different layers and figuring out, like, how do we actually do this? You can't just say, sorry, there's no more space, or you have to pay more than you're able to pass on. So now you just have to sacrifice margin just to be able to kind of keep making food, because people are going to eventually, and we hear it now, or they're just making that decision, right? It's like, this isn't worth it anymore. I can't make money. We have so many members that have actually given up their sort of day job to start this and pursue their passion. And then, you do it for 3 years and it's like, well, okay, but I'm not even collecting a paycheck yet. Like, how am I supposed to get over that hump to get there? And, we want to be able to foster and support those so they can continue and grow. But if they keep hitting the same wall, I mean, it's, sooner or later, your patience is going to run out, or your money will, right? So,
well, typically it's the money, and then you just call it a day, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And that's where we're worried. Like, we were, had a couple of meetings the other day, and we were, talking to some people, and they said, geez, like, we're terrified if our lease rates are coming up in a year and a half, and we keep hearing rumblings that they're going to be 40% higher, because they're going to want to actually price this out so they can bring in somebody bigger who's willing to pay more. So it's like, geez, if people are thinking that now, then we don't want to wait for a bunch of businesses to, like, on average, the number of businesses in BC in the food space has actually continued to grow. But I mean, this keeps going, and we're going to see an opposite trend, and that'll be a little scary, because I've been in this role for 9 years, and I haven't really looked at that macro data until I started in this job. But it's gone up literally every single year for the last 9 years. So if this starts to decline, I think it's going to be quite a bit of a bad indicator for the long term. So
but a lot of your sit downs, then, I'm assuming, are at the government level. So talking to municipalities, talking to the provincial government, I'm assuming some degree federal government, maybe via the provincial. But so what are you finding though? Like, are without, I'm not just asking to slam anybody, but do our politicians get it? Like, or is it, does it matter until the votes matter? Like, does anybody actually pay attention to this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, but it's a complicated one, Kenny. I would say some of them get it, but it's just way more complicated than any one of them. And just because of the size of the industry, like, we typically, like, on paper, we fall under the Ministry of Agriculture, but so much of the stuff that affects us goes way beyond the purview of the Ministry of Agriculture. So, when it first started, I had, good relationship with the Ministry of Agriculture. Now I've kind of evolved that and starting to work with different ministries. I am involved federally, because I'm vice chair of Food and Beverage Canada, which is a national advocacy group. So I certainly have a lot of involvement on the national level.
Okay.
And that's important too, because you think of some of the major policy things that impact industry, they're usually happening in Ottawa and not in Victoria, from a policy perspective. So being plugged in and being able to communicate that to our members is really key. And also, just advocacy is an interesting animal in BC. When you sort of raise the flag on something that could be happening down the road, just the average size of business, just because the average size of company is so small here, they'll generally kind of, like, they end up having to operate from here just because they're wearing so many hats and they're working long days. So they don't really understand sometimes some of the potential downstream impacts of these policy changes until it's already hitting them. And of course, you can't advocate after it's already happened. That ship has kind of sailed by then, type of thing, right? So trying to communicate and kind of engage industry on those kinds of things can be a bit challenging in BC, but it's really important. And I'd say the Ministry of Agriculture in BC has actually been quite strong. They've been pretty. They've been very supportive, and they're always sort of keep the channels open, which is good. But the problem is they're going to be limited within their power to really affect meaningful change. So so it can get frustrating at times. I mean, my first few years, I would say advocacy used to be about 15 to 20% of my job. And then I think during COVID, it was about 95% of my job. And it's probably leveled off somewhere in the middle. I'd say it's probably more like about 30 or 40%. But I mean, those are important conversations, and we see ourselves as that conduit to make sure that government does understand what some of those challenges are. And certainly even with things like the retail code of conduct and some of those practices, like, we've been, regularly communicating to them about some of the challenges that our members are facing in that arena. So it's, those are important relationships to have, but they've got to be collaborative.
For sure.
Oh, did we lose him?
I think we just lost him again.
I think we should get him to just back up a second and talk about the membership.
I'd like to, otherwise we could talk about the government thing forever, because
I think what he's doing is really cool. But it occurred to me that we skipped that part a little bit.
I know. Well, because that's where the questions go. But because once until he gets back on, it's not Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Transportation. Like, there's so many things. So it's a big. That's another podcast.
Oh,
unless we can't
yeah.
get James back, and then it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how these groups do it.
No,
I
it's
really
just
don't.
it's a lot of things, right? And I think I just think you have a membership base. I mean, these guys, CHFA, you have a membership base that's so broad, and you've
It's
got
small
like
to large.
food manufacturers, you've got brands, you've got folks like us in there, you've got brokers, you got all these folks in there, and then you're right, they're like small to big, big to small, they're all over the place, right? Like, so how do you even know what government groups you got to be in and all of those things? Hey,
I don't know.
while you were gone, we changed the entire set of topics, and we're on it. No, I'm just joking.
We've already moved on.
But we realized that we went probably one step too far, because what might be good is for you just to cover what BC Food and Bev does, and what your membership sort of kind of looks like, because I think that'll fill in some gaps.
It'll fill something else, because otherwise, honestly, we could probably do an hour.
Yeah,
literally, we could do a podcast on how to deal with government and the challenges we should all have, and how we should push our MLAs and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that might be podcast number 2.
Sure. So, sure, we can back up a little bit. So I mean, we're a nonprofit, but we're an industry association, and we kind of represent the full gambit. Like, we're the only association that kind of handles micro, small, medium, and large. Anybody who's manufactures in here, or at least is based here, and sometimes even has production elsewhere, they're members of our association. So our combined membership is about $7 billion. And their needs are largely different. Like, I mean, a larger company, if you've got 400 employees here, you probably don't need help with a lot of the, some of the basic functionality things,
right.
getting listings, getting distributed, understanding the regulatory environment. They'll have full-time staff dedicated to those things. So what we've really tried to do as we kind of grown and evolved is really kind of diversify and sort of specify what our offering is based on the size of business. I mean, smaller businesses need help with so many things. So that takes up a good chunk of our time, and it represents about 64% of our membership. So most of our members are actually very, very small, and they make up the overwhelming majority of the industry in BC. The number of large companies in BC is pretty finite, right? Like, you don't have you don't have any multi-billion-dollar companies that just move here and station themselves here. So what we try to do is kind of really focus on growth. So we're trying to help people grow, whether they're big or small, and that becomes a core part of it. But we really kind of have 4 main platforms. One of them I touched on earlier was about building community. It's about bringing people together, understanding some of those commonalities, so we can kind of it's easy to sort of diagnose and problem solve with shared learning, and even just events and networking and connecting. It's so key. I mean, we're not going to have all the answers, but we've also got a huge network. So if we don't have the answers, we can connect you to somebody that does.
Kenny.
And then the other.
Kenny.
Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Oh, so I'm sorry, James. I just said we send everyone to Kenny. That's what we do.
Yeah. There you go. Easy. Look at that.
Easy. Done.
That bow tied itself, didn't it?
Sooner or later it's going to come that way. That's fine.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the other one is really growth. I mean, we do try to focus and help companies that want to grow. I mean, if you're a startup and you want to sell in farmers markets and you want to just stay there and don't have any ambitions of growing beyond that, chances are you won't get a lot of value out of membership with us, because you won't need us. Although I still always tell people, an association membership is just like a gym membership. You're ultimately going to get out of it what you put into it.
Exactly.
Right. And then the other part is around general learning. I mentioned already, we've got a lot of, plant-based and wineries and natural health products and seafood. It's such a diverse industry here. So we really trying to kind of focus on those common things that everybody needs, and really so we kind of call that general knowledge. So as opposed to getting overly specific or overly technical on small topics or specific subcategories, we generally try to kind of provide help with sort of that broader curriculum. And then the other important one we've just been talking about is also being that voice for industry, and advocacy is a really important part of what we do. And those are kind of our 4 platforms. And then to do that, one of the things that I've struggled with is I like to take everything on. And of course, you're as a nonprofit and a small team, and I always like to say we're small but mighty. But as we want to take out things and make things bigger and make things better, it's it puts strain on the team. So we just kind of did a strategic plan, and I just sort of laid out, those are kind of our 4 pillars that we're kind of building on to really help our members in the best way we can. But the other thing, it's not really, none of those pillars are very, very strong unless we've got a strong foundation. So a really core part of what's my main responsibility is to really make sure it's got solid financial footing so that we can actually accelerate and move those pillars forward. Because if we don't have the resource to actually do any of those things, or even the people to do that, the last thing I want to do, I've got a group of extraordinary people. The last thing I want to do is burn them out or feel like I'm taking them for granted because they can just keep doing more and more and more. Like, we have to be smarter about that. So we, putting more systems in place. We've evolved a lot. I think we're about triple the size of an association we were when I started. And now we have a team of 7 as opposed to a team of 2 when I started. But we actually want to add a couple more people this year as well. And again, it's just about being able to build, bring new ideas, bring new discipline in, and it's always trying to find that way to add value for members. And the stuff that we do well, let's make it better. If the stuff we're doing is not working, let's scrap it. We've never been afraid of doing that either, and just throwing those things away and focusing on what's going to resonate the most with our members. And it's kind of nice because actually when I look at what we do now versus when I started, like, there's very few things that are kind of legacy that we've kind of held over through the last 9 years. But I think that's a good thing because it means that we're being responsive to what industry is telling us. How was that?
No, that's really cool.
That's
like,
really
I think that's kind of what we needed, right? Because I think that rounds out. You think of the conversations that you're having now with government and all the different levels of government. It makes sense. I think the other thing that when you were coming back on, Kenny and I were talking about was just how the heck you go about calibrating who you talk to, how you talk to folks for a membership that's so diverse as yours, right? Because you've just got small to big, you've got food processors, you've got brands, you've got kind of everything in between as well. How do you, I guess 2 parts of that question. One is, how do you do that? And then 2, how do you keep a pulse on what your members are worried about? I guess they're,
And again, with the diversity, you could have a whole set of different worries in all these little buckets.
You can. It's just, and you need to really listen and understand, because sometimes their issues are very, very specific to whatever kind of product they're making. But a lot of the time, they're still, the things we've talked about already. I can't find space. I can't find a warehouse. I can't find a distributor. I can't pass on these costs to, through pricing. I've got labor issues. I can't afford equipment. The bank won't give us money. I don't understand these regulatory changes. So those are really still fairly universal. But that said, it's a really good question, Phil. I have to say I'm very, Kenny, you asked me earlier about, sort of my interest in the job and when I first took it. And I'll say that the 20 years I spent in the industry before coming into this has been invaluable to exactly what you're saying, Phil. Like, I've been able to, when I talk to people right away, I think early that was important, because it also, I think it gave the association credibility if I actually knew what people are talking about and I felt what they felt and I've been where they are. And then also adding Elisa, just in terms of this specific part about talking to industry and talking to members. Elisa has an industry background as well. She's also incredibly empathetic. She's a great listener. And she gets calls regularly. We get kind of different kinds of calls. It's kind of funny. Everyone who's known her now in the last few years, she gets a lot of people who just kind of reach out to her. And then I've got some people that have been members for 10 years and they reach out to me just because that's who they're familiar with. But we're still small, and that's actually kind of nice. Like, I'm a big believer in putting your best foot forward. So it's like, hey, if somebody else in the organization's got a good relationship with that member, then they should be reaching out. And then we also, we have weekly meetings and we start talking through those different things. So between the membership team and myself, like, who are we talking to? What are we hearing that's going on? And because we're a small group, it also that drives our programming as well. Like, if we are going to do a breakfast series topic and we're going to bring in 100 people to it, well, we don't really have to kind of sit around and daydream about what kind of topics we want to do, because if we're doing our job properly and we're actually getting input from our members and we're starting to hear certain questions being asked on an increased frequency, well, we can help 50 people with that at 50 times, or we can actually create a forum to kind of bring all of those people together, kind of do it once. So that also
We lose him always at a key point. That I just want to hear the rest of that story.
He's leaving us hanging. It's actually a tactic, I think.
And I think it's a tactic too.
I think he's.
I think it's a tactic too.
No, but I like it. I like what they're doing because I think they really do, right? Like if you think of even the breakfast that so Kenny went, for anyone who was there, I mean, Kenny spoke at a breakfast, and what I can tell you is before that breakfast, Kenny spent a lot of time fretting over the topic and whether he was kind of going to be on point for the topic, whether it was too doom and gloom, but to their credit, in a lot of ways, they asked you as kind of a well-placed ask, right? Because they knew that people were worried about, right? Because you've since heard that from a whole bunch of people that we've talked to, where they were like, "Dude, that was right up." Nobody said
it was more timely, I guess, than what even I had anticipated, and that's sort of what I wanted to ask you, is because it's kind of, I know that everybody's got some different problems, and I know there's a lot of similar problems, but out of straight curiosity, like what are, I guess I'm always trying to figure out, like, because they do quite a bit of, as a group, a lot of breakfast type things. We just keep talking through. You don't sweat it.
Hey guys, I don't know what the hell.
Don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world.
No.
We'll do this again. We'll do it in the evening run when you're home.
It's a very clever tactic on your side. Is you're right in the middle of an interesting point, and then you drop off, and we're like, "Damn it, he's left us hanging."
And the answer to it all is
exactly. That's what it is. And we're thinking, okay, shit, like really? And it's not once you've done that. You try 3 times. It's every time it's on a cliffhanger. Think this is bullshit.
I was just thinking, you know what? You got me on here for an hour. They're going to figure out I'm just not that bright, so I got to cut myself off halfway through. So you think that I have important things to say without.
Well, you're not helping us because then they have to listen to us, and they know we're not that bright, so it's not helping anybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and all I was trying to say was that if we're listening to our members about the things that are concerning them, we actually use that to create forums to bring everybody together to talk about them, rather than kind of dealing with 50 people on the same issue.
But that's all easy to say, and it makes total sense. And you guys say it very easily, but it's still hard to do. I'll tell you why. Like I give you an example. Like the one I did, my first question to Sumner was like, who's in the audience? Because it's no use talking about pricing to a retailer if all you do is process, unless you want to make sure that you understand the mechanics of pricing so you can help whoever you're processing for. But typically, you know what I mean? That's a brand issue. So you're trying to, you guys, your bucket is so freaking diverse.
Yeah.
I don't know how you guys manage, because we've done 2 webinars with you guys now, and we've done the one breakfast thing. And it's topics that when we get asked, I sometimes look at them thinking, if they're all food processors and producers, like, what the hell are they going to get out of this? And then you get to the thing, and it's all over the place. There's brands, there's processors, there's someone. I mean, they're everywhere, and you're thinking, holy shit! Like, how do you manage this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's why that's why it's so important to have such a good team, right? And we've got so many, and we've got like people who have incredible attention to detail. I mean, people that are incredibly thorough, and you got other people who are incredibly passionate. You kind of put all that together, and it sort of becomes bigger than the sum of the parts. I honestly say that's kind of what you attribute it to. So and I think everyone understanding what their role is, and I think working collaboratively. I think we're generally a group that likes to work together, and and we all, it's not like we all have industry backgrounds. I actually think in some ways, if we all had 10 years in the food industry, it would probably be tougher in some ways, because I think we'd probably have a harder time with consensus. Whereas Elise and I kind of talk a lot about the different topics and stuff, and we're generally on the same page. Or so then we kind of talk through sort of the what becomes pretty easy, because usually Elise and I driving it, because we talked, and Christine as well, who's now talking a ton to members, and they all like her better than Elise and I anyway. So but between the 3 of us, we kind of start to do here's what we're hearing. And then that kind of drives the what, and then the rest of the team can kind of pull together the how, and it kind of takes off from there. Like, I mean, we're talking about breakfast series. I mean, of course, we got food pros a week today, and I mean, that's like a breakfast series times 1,000. I mean, there's so many moving parts along with that. They're just working so hard right now to get ready for it. So it's I'm very, very proud of the group. I'm very fortunate to have to work with such a great group of people.
No, it's
going to be so good. Like we just like we've had the privilege of kind of having each of these folks on Fast Thoughts with us, and there's
some really cool people.
There's so many cool people, and then that panel with Aaron Jade and Karen from Bloom is just going to be like. Wow.
I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be really cool. And I do think. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, and even in a case like Eve, like if you've been in the food industry for any period of time, most people have heard Eve Potvin's story. And when I first started, it was funny because it was like he'd spoken at a bunch of events, and I was like, okay, well, we can't have Eve come and speak because he's spoken at so many things like before I got here. But it's so interesting. But now the fact that he sold off his second company, he's actually making a go of it again and making like plant-based sushi.
Right.
We said like this is also he's a startup again, but he's got all his wealth of experience. So he's got a similar message, but now he's got a new vision and a new audience. So it's kind of funny that it's like I'd hate for somebody to look at that and go, "Oh, I've heard him speak," because what he'll be actually talking about.
Not on this one,
it's going to be so different. Like how many entrepreneurs do you know of have actually got it like who's been that successful once? But I mean, he's making a go of it on the third try. It's crazy,
and it's a good product, by the way. Just to be clear.
Oh, it's great. Oh, I went to the launch. As a matter of well, here's a funny story. I was a total peon when I went to work for Eve. That was like 1998, and I was a marketing analyst or something. I was like the junior person in the marketing department, and I worked with him, but obviously not that closely because he had like senior people that he worked with most of the time. And then fast forward like 20 years later, he asked me to introduce him at the press conference when they announced the launch of Conscious. Like I thought that was actually pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
That was my arrival.
Is he bringing
30 years in the making, but
is he bringing sample? You almost need to just say, listen, you can't speak unless you're gonna bring some sushi with you. Like
that would be awesome.
No, right?
It'd be awesome.
Yeah,
it would be awesome.
Yeah, it was actually funny. When we were at the opening, they had all their food out, and everybody was trying it and was marveling at it. And it was pretty hilarious because there was a couple of ladies there who were pregnant and they hadn't been able to eat sushi for months, and it was so funny. They're like, almost felt guilty eating it, but it's like, oh my god! I said to Eve, I said, there's a whole new marketing category for you. You've got pregnant women who can't eat sushi. There you go. There's your new vein to tap into. So
there's a lot of people out there, man.
Yeah.
And he actually has done a really nice job with it. The product's actually it's a good product.
Yeah, and it's a good mix. There's a lot of great speakers, and that's the thing.
I like that.
And the whole day is really just about bringing people together. It's about that building community that we talked about, and great speakers. And they're going to be sharing their stories and their passion. But it's that passion piece that kind of, it doesn't matter who you talk to in the industry. I don't think I've ever met anybody, any founder or any entrepreneur who's worked in the space who's been indifferent about what they do. Right? So,
no, everybody's wired for sound, right?
Yeah. But that's great though, because you don't usually get that anywhere else, right? You don't like. I mean, I have lots of friends who we'll talk about work, but nobody's fired up about what they do, right? They're like, oh, I sorted papers and I filed reports today, and wow, that was stimulating. But that's what makes our industry pretty unique, actually. So, and I think that's probably why I fell in love with it. So
that's why we never leave.
That is why we never leave. That's right.
Right. It seems to just keep pulling you back in, right? It's just one of those things.
Oh, I couldn't imagine what else I would do. Like if I wasn't doing this, or if I wasn't working in the food industry, I just don't, because my whole life, and of course all the relationships I built over the years, I'm friends with people that have been in the industry for 25 years as well, and it's wonderful.
I wouldn't change it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Despite all the things we complained about in the first 20 minutes.
But that's part of life too. And you know what? Sometimes you complain, but a lot of times you're rehashing because you're always thinking. So you bring up a bunch of negatives and you think, okay, how do we get through them? How do we get through them? Or how do we get around them? Or go over, or go under? Like there's always got to be a way to put a roadblock up. There's always a way around it, and that's half the fun of the game. Is trying to figure out how to move through.
It is. And I used to talk about how one of the things I love most about the industry was how resilient it is. And then resilient became the most overused word in the world for 3 years. So I try not to use it anymore. But so if you come up with a better word than resilient, that means the same thing, then let me know. But I keep wanting to say it, and then I keep pulling back. So
I think, the only other word that comes to mind is persistent, because I think people in this industry,
they just don't give up.
We're wired to go. We're wired to recognize when we fail, and then we're wired to recognize, no, that wasn't the final go. Like I screwed it up, but I know exactly what I did wrong, and I'm gonna.
And you just keep plugging.
Right, we all do it, and
at
some point you go, you idiot, right? You gotta, but we don't, right? We just kind of get right back up again. And you go, no, I figured out I'll get it this time. It's all good. We got it right. So.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Okay, my friend, your time is done. We could have you back on for sure. We could have you and Elise on. I'd love to talk more about the government stuff because I do think I don't think, again, none of this sexy talk gets onto the news or onto that side. So I don't think people really understand as much as they should or could. And our listeners are all CPG in your community as well. So it's always trying to find stuff that they could actually take away and do something with it, right?
Oh,
and
yeah,
joining these organizations is important. So if you are in BC and you're a brand and or a food processor, manufacturer, co-packer, you really should take a look at BC Food and Bev.
Yeah.
There's your plug.
Cool.
There's your plug.
Give me a call.
And you got a few people you can pick from. You don't have to talk. If you don't like James, you can phone Elise. If you don't like her, phone Sumner. You got Christine. Someone will talk to you.
You don't have to search very far to find somebody who'll probably like more than me. So there you go.
There you go.
Or somebody smarter than me either. So
That's funny.
If people want to get a hold of you
yeah.
or BC Food and Bev, like this, you specifically, BC Food and Bev as well, how do they do it? What's the best way to?
Yeah, if you go to our website, if you go to our website, you've got all of our pictures and all of our alter egos as Muppet characters.
I've seen that. I love it.
We lost them again. It's always on the cliffhangers.
I think those are hilarious. But yeah, you can go to I'll fill that in for him. But you can go to BC Food and Bev. It's literally bcfb.ca. So B, C is in Charles, F is in food, B is in beverage.ca to go to BCFB, and then that's where you find them. And then James Donaldson.
James is easy on LinkedIn. Is easy to find.
Yeah.
That's
so
where
we'll
I think
put all the links
talked.
we'll put all the links in there and everything like that. But James is gone, but he's there somewhere, but he probably can't hear us. But thank you, James, for coming on. And
I think we will have him back on. We'll do.
Yeah, I think I was going to say to him, I think we'll shoot him a note after this, and I think as we head into the fall, for example, what people need to be thinking about, when they kind of ramp up for the fall, when we come back from the summer, I think would be a really good time to have him back on. So
yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah,
totally agree. Okay, young man, you can say goodbye because we're going into another podcast.
Yes.
Close it up for you.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I'm not sure if they're done with me or not. So anyway.
No, that's okay. We filled in all the blanks for you. We've got all the links below.
Website will go on. They tell you can find you on LinkedIn. They can always phone BC Food and Bev, but important to join these organizations if you're in the industry. Great place for resources. Great place to talk to people and learn before potentially you fall.
We were thinking that it might be really great for you and Elisa to come back on just as we kind of ramp up for September. As we kind of hit that last quarter of the year, we're going to roll into the summer. People are going to start taking breathers and things like that. But September is when the tempo picks up and it doesn't let go until Christmas, right? So it might be a really good time for you guys to come on and kind of hit the highlights on what's happening and things you're worried about or things that are happening in government that we should be thinking about or looking at. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Love it. Love to do that. Yeah. I'm happy.
Awesome.
We'd be happy to come on together. Okay. Anyway, thanks so much. I know you gotta bounce, but Kenny and
Phil, we'll
thanks
see you
so
next
much
Thursday.
for the time.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yes. Yeah. See you next Thursday. Looking forward to it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Take care, bud.
Bye, James.
All right. Bye.
Ciao.